Sign them now, Zuri. Tunde Adebayo did not whisper. He said it in front of everybody. In front of ministers, investors, celebrities, old money families, and half the Lagos elite. And beside him, with her jeweled hand wrapped around his arm, stood the woman he had been parading around for months as if his wife no longer existed. Zuri looked down at the envelope in her hands. Divorce papers. Not in private, not with dignity, not with remorse. At his own victory gala, while his mistress smiled. But what Tunde did not know that night was this. The woman he was trying to erase from his life was only days away from becoming one of the most powerful women on the African continent. And 5 years later, when he saw her again, he would understand that some men do not lose their wives. They lose the only person who ever made their rise possible. The chandeliers above the Imperial Crown Hotel glowed like melted gold. Every table in the grand ballroom shimmered with crystal glasses, polished silver, and imported flowers flown in from Kenya and South Africa. The event was supposed to celebrate Tunde Adebayo's latest business deal, a fintech acquisition that had pushed his company into the headlines and made him one of the most talked-about entrepreneurs in Lagos. Reporters were there. Politicians were there. Foreign investors were there. And so was his wife. Only nobody was treating her like one. Across the ballroom, Zuri Adebayo stood near the service corridor in a modest black gown, holding herself together with the kind of discipline only pain can teach. She had once imagined what it would feel like to stand beside her husband on a night like this. Years earlier, when Tunde had nothing but ideas, debt, ambition, and wounded pride, she had stayed awake helping him prepare investor decks. She had sold inherited jewelry to help him cover payroll. She had worked quietly, sacrificed privately, and believed in him loudly when nobody else did. But now? Now she was being treated like a stain on the decor. At the center table, Tunde leaned close to Layla Mensa, a glamorous socialite whose face had been appearing beside his in gossip blogs for months. Layla laughed as if the room belonged to her. Maybe, in a way, it already did. One of the women at the table glanced toward Zuri and smirked. "Is that really his wife?" Another sipped her champagne and replied, "If she is, she certainly doesn't look like it." A man in a navy tuxedo chuckled. "Honestly, Layla looks more like Mrs. Adebayo than she does." The table erupted in soft, poisonous laughter. Layla tilted her head with mock innocence. "Oh, don't be cruel," she said. "Every powerful man needs someone dependable at home. Someone to keep things practical." More laughter. Tunde did not stop it. He smiled. That smile hurt more than the words. Because insults from strangers were easy to understand. But betrayal from the man whose life you helped build? That kind of pain has no language at first. It only has weight. Zuri looked down at her hands. For years, she had explained away his coldness. For years, she had defended him to people who warned her. For years, she had mistaken distance for stress, disrespect for pressure, neglect for temporary distraction. But humiliation in public is difficult to misread. Humiliation is clarity. And tonight, clarity had finally arrived. Dinner was announced 20 minutes later. Guests moved toward their assigned seats, while violin music floated across the ballroom like something too elegant to belong in a room so full of cruelty. Zuri searched for her place card. When she found it, her chest tightened. The last table in the room. The one reserved for assistants, junior staff, event coordinators, and drivers. For a long moment, she simply stared. Then she looked up toward the main family table. There sat Tunde, and beside him, in the place that should have belonged to his wife, sat Layla. Photographers kept circling them. Every flash of light felt like a public announcement. Replacement complete. Around Zuri, whispers began to spread. She's been pushed to the staff table. No, surely not. Did he really seat the mistress beside him? How shameless. Zuri's eyes met Tunde's across the ballroom. Just for a second. 1 second. Long enough for him to know she understood. Long enough for him to fix it if he wanted to. Long enough for decency to choose him. Instead, he turned away and said something to Layla that made her laugh again. That was when Zuri understood the truth. This was not negligence. It was design. Not an accident. A message. And everyone in that room had received it. She sat down quietly at table 29. She did not eat. She could not taste anything. At the main table, Tunde rose later to give a speech about vision, discipline, and loyalty. Loyalty. The word almost made her laugh. He spoke about sacrifice as if he understood it. He spoke about partnership as if he had not publicly buried his own. Then, while smiling at Layla, he said something that sent a low wave through the room. Sometimes, he said smoothly, the people who begin the journey with you are not the ones meant for the next chapter. The audience reacted with knowing amusement. Layla lowered her eyes like a woman pretending not to enjoy victory. Zuri remained still. Inside, something old was dying. Not her love. That had been dying for years. No. What died that night was hope. And when hope dies, a woman changes shape. She left the gala without saying goodbye. The driver did not ask questions. The city lights blurred outside the window as Lagos moved around her, alive and loud and indifferent. Her phone stayed silent. No message, no apology, no explanation. When she arrived home, the mansion felt colder than the ballroom. Too large, too quiet, too full of history she no longer wished to carry. Upstairs, the answer was waiting. An envelope lay neatly on the bed. Her name was written across the front in Tunde's handwriting. Zuri already knew. Still, her fingers trembled when she opened it. Divorce papers. And a short note. No emotion. No regret. Just legal language and one handwritten sentence. This is best for both of us. Zuri stared at the words until they stopped looking real. Then she laughed. A strange laugh. A tired laugh. The kind that appears when crying would break something deeper. Around midnight, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She almost ignored it. Almost. Hello? A calm male voice answered. Good evening, Miss Okonkwo. My name is Elias Mbeki. I served as legal advisor to your late grandfather. Zuri sat up slowly. She had not heard her maiden name used like that in years. Excuse me? I apologize for calling so late, he said. But the trustees believe the time has come. The time for what? A brief silence. For the truth. The next morning, a black armored vehicle arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. No logo, no unnecessary display. Only quiet authority. It took her not to Tunde's world, but far beyond it. The car moved through Victoria Island, then past layers of security toward a private office tower most people never noticed. Inside, on the top floor, 11 people were waiting for her. Bankers, trustees, executives, legal advisors. They all stood when she entered. That unsettled her more than anything else. For years, she had been ignored in rooms where her husband was praised. Now, powerful strangers were rising to greet her as if respect had always belonged to her. Mr. Mbeki approached first. "Welcome, Miss Zuri Okonkwo." She frowned slightly. "I go by Adebayo." "For legal purposes," he said gently. "That was temporary." What followed felt unreal. A presentation began. Screens lit up with maps, holdings, trusts, subsidiaries, and corporate structures stretching across Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Rwanda, Botswana, and beyond. Clean energy projects, port logistics, agricultural infrastructure, telecom investments, healthcare financing, education funds, commercial real estate, private equity partnerships. The scale was incomprehensible. Her grandfather, Chief Emmanuel Okonkwo, had not merely been rich. He had built one of the most protected private family holding networks on the continent. Its assets had been deliberately obscured from public attention for decades, and Zuri was the primary heir. She thought there had been some mistake. There wasn't. Estimated family control value? $52 billion. Zuri stared at the number in silence. Mr. Mbeki then revealed the reason the truth had been hidden. Her grandfather had left clear written instructions. Zuri was to learn about the inheritance only after life had revealed the people around her, without the influence of wealth. He wanted her to discover who loved her before money entered the room. He wanted her to know the difference between admiration and loyalty, between attention and respect, between appetite and love. And suddenly, the previous night made terrible sense. She had spent years asking why she was never enough for Tunde. Now she understood something much harsher and much cleaner. It was never about enough. It was about character. His, not hers. Most people would have signed immediately. Most people would have embraced the title, the power, the headlines, the revenge fantasy. Zuri did none of that. She asked for reports, then more reports, then meetings, then field visits. She wanted to know the truth before she accepted the weight, because unlike the man she had married, Zuri had never confused access with competence. If she was going to lead billions, she would understand them first. For the next 18 months, she disappeared from public life. She studied balance sheets in Nairobi, visited grain corridors in Zambia, inspected energy sites in northern Nigeria, met engineers in Kigali, spent long afternoons with port managers in Mombasa, sat with women farmers in Ghana, listened to mid-level staff who had never been heard by the people above them. And everywhere she went, people noticed the same thing. She listened before she spoke. She remembered names. She asked precise questions. She was never loud, never theatrical, never desperate to look important. Real power, she was learning, rarely shouts. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, Tunde believed he had won. The divorce moved forward. Layla became a regular presence in his home. His mother openly celebrated the end of what she called a mismatched marriage. His business friends congratulated him privately. To them, he was evolving, upgrading, moving into a more glamorous chapter. But what Tunde did not know was this. Several of the business doors that had quietly opened for him over the years had opened because of unseen respect attached to Zuri's bloodline. Not because people knew she was wealthy. They didn't. But old networks knew her family name. Old institutions knew where not to interfere. Old loyalties had protected him in ways he never bothered to question. Once Zuri stepped away, those invisible cushions slowly disappeared. Not dramatically, quietly. And quietly is often how a false empire begins to shake. 5 years passed. Not in scandal, not in noise, in work. Under Zuri's leadership, Okonkwo Horizon Holdings grew from protected wealth into disciplined influence. She modernized outdated divisions, cut vanity spending, expanded logistics corridors connecting West and East African trade routes, funded women-led manufacturing cooperatives, built solar-backed cold storage programs for rural agricultural communities, launched scholarship funds for girls in science and engineering, backed housing projects for women leaving abusive homes. She did not make herself the center of every campaign. She let the work speak. And slowly, then suddenly, the business world began using her name with a certain tone. Respect without gossip. Influence without spectacle. She became the kind of woman powerful men prepared for before entering a room. By year 5, her net worth and voting control had pushed her beyond her grandfather's original structures. Her decisions moved markets. Her signature changed negotiations. Her presence altered who felt secure and who did not. And yet, most of the public still did not know her face. That was by choice. While Zuri was becoming unavoidable, Tunde was becoming less certain. His company had not collapsed. That would have been too clean. Instead, the erosion came piece by piece. Investors responded slower. Government introductions became harder to secure. Partnerships suddenly required more scrutiny. Meetings once offered easily were now delayed, postponed, redirected, or denied. Layla noticed the shift too. Luxury can survive many things. Confusion is not one of them. Their arguments grew. Her patience shrank. Admiration built on status rarely survives stagnant status. By the time the relationship broke, Tunde was too proud to admit that the emptiness he felt had less to do with Layla leaving and more to do with memory returning. Because now, without the noise, he remembered things. Zuri bringing him food during all-night work sessions. Zuri paying bills he thought had handled themselves. Zuri defending him when others doubted him. Zuri seeing potential in a version of him that did not deserve her faith. Some losses do not hurt when they happen. They hurt when maturity finally makes them visible. The invitation arrived on thick ivory stock. The Pan-African Infrastructure and Future Capital Summit, Kigali. Tunde accepted immediately. He needed visibility. He needed relevance. He needed a win. The summit ballroom in Kigali was more understated than Lagos glamour. But it was far more important. This was where serious power met. Not celebrity power, not trend power, decision-making power. Sovereign fund delegates, regional ministers, investment groups, energy leaders, telecom boards, private banking houses. The kind of room where one introduction could restore a career. As dinner approached, a murmur spread through the space. A chairwoman had arrived. Someone whose group had recently led one of the continent's largest integrated logistics and energy acquisitions. Someone who almost never attended public events unless the event mattered. Guests began turning toward the entrance. Tunde adjusted his cufflinks and looked too. The ballroom doors opened, and time slowed. The woman who entered wore a sculpted black gown with understated gold detailing. No diamonds trying too hard, no performative entourage, No frantic attempt to capture attention. She didn't need to. The room moved around her as water moves around a stone. Ministers stepped forward. CEOs straightened their posture. Seasoned investors waited for the chance to greet her. Tunde frowned. Something about her was familiar. Then she turned, and the air left his body. Zuri. Not the woman he remembered, not the wife he had humiliated, not the quiet figure at the back table. This woman walked like ownership had finally met identity. This woman had become impossible to dismiss. Beside him, one of the delegates whispered, almost reverently, "Chairwoman Okonkwo." Another replied, "She's brilliant, ruthless when necessary, but fair. Everyone wants a meeting." Tunde said nothing. He could not. Because in that moment, he understood with brutal accuracy that the woman he had tried to reduce had become more powerful than everyone he had spent years trying to impress, including him. When Zuri was invited to the stage later that evening, the applause came fast and full. Not because the crowd was being polite, because they meant it. She stood behind the podium and let the room settle. Then she spoke in a voice that was calm, low, and impossible to ignore. "Thank you," she said. "But if I've learned anything over the years, it is that recognition is the smallest part of meaningful work." The room quieted even further. "We live in a time that rewards visibility," she continued. "But visibility is not the same thing as value. Some of the most important work in this world happens far away from applause." Heads nodded around the ballroom. Tunde remained still. He knew, with the sharp instinct of guilt, that this was not merely a business speech. This was a life translated into principle. Zuri spoke about dignity, about institutions that should serve people rather than consume them, about wealth that should create stability, not spectacle. Then she paused. Her eyes moved across the room. For one brief second, they rested on Tunde. Not with rage, not with pain. That would have been easier for him. She looked at him with freedom. And then she said the sentence that would follow him for years. "Many people mistake silence for weakness. But sometimes, silence is simply strength waiting for the right moment to stop explaining itself." No one else in the room understood how completely that landed. But Tunde did. He lowered his eyes. She went on. "There was a time in my life when I believed that if I gave enough, loved enough, endured enough, eventually I would be treated with the dignity I had already earned. Experience taught me otherwise. Respect that must be begged for is not respect. Love that strips away dignity is not love. And success that exists only to prove someone wrong is still a form of captivity." The audience broke into applause. Several people stood, not because the words were dramatic, because they were true. And truth, when spoken by someone who has survived it, travels differently. Zuri ended simply. "Freedom is not becoming louder than those who wounded you. Freedom is building a life so whole that their opinion no longer has authority over your peace." This time, the entire room rose. A standing ovation. Tunde clapped too, slowly, like a man paying respect at his own trial. After the speech, the room swelled around Zuri. People wanted introductions, partnerships, photographs, future meetings. Tunde waited at the edge of the crowd for nearly 20 minutes before an opening appeared. When she finally turned toward him, she did not flinch. "Good evening, Tunde." No bitterness, no trembling, no unresolved ache, just recognition. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In none of them was he the smaller person. Zuri, he said, and immediately hated how inadequate her name sounded in his mouth after all these years. She waited. He swallowed. I was wrong. The sentence felt pathetic the moment it left him. Wrong was too small for what he had done. Wrong was forgetting an anniversary. Wrong was misjudging a business forecast. He had not been wrong. He had been cruel. He had been arrogant. He had been morally lazy in the presence of devotion. Still, it was the best he had. I treated you badly, he said. Worse than badly. She held his gaze. Yes, she said softly. You did. No anger, just fact. That hurt more. I didn't understand who you were. A faint, unreadable smile touched her face. No, she replied. You understood exactly what kind of person I was. You just didn't think it mattered. The words went through him cleanly, because they were true. He looked away for a moment, then back again. Are you happy? It was a selfish question. He knew that. But some part of him needed the answer. Zuri glanced across the ballroom toward the people waiting for her, the projects still ahead of her, the life she had built without him. Then she smiled, a real smile. Yes, she said, I am. And in that instant, Tunde understood something final. She did not need his apology to heal. She did not need his regret to feel vindicated. She did not need him to witness her rise for the rise to be real. She had already left him behind in every way that mattered. Zuri extended her hand, a polite gesture, nothing more. I wish you peace, Tunde. He shook it. 5 years of marriage reduced to a formal goodbye in a crowded summit hall. But even that was more grace than he had earned. Then someone called her name from across the room. She nodded once and walked away. And the people around her opened a path without being asked. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is revealed by the space others make for it. That night, Tunde returned to his hotel suite, unable to sit still. Kigali glittered below him. The city was beautiful, precise, alive. But he barely saw it. All he could see was the version of his life that no longer existed. For years he had blamed Zuri for being too quiet, too ordinary, too reserved for the world he wanted. Now he had seen her command a room filled with people whose influence extended across nations. Not through performance, not through seduction, not through noise, but through substance. It was a brutal realization. Zuri had never been small. He had simply been too shallow to recognize depth unless it arrived wrapped in spectacle. Over the following months, regret settled into him like weather. Not dramatic enough to kill him, constant enough to change the climate of every day. He still worked, still attended meetings, still signed documents and smiled when required, but the old thrill had gone. Because once a man realizes he traded loyalty for vanity, applause loses some of its flavor. He also began seeing his own world more clearly. Executives who flattered power but ignored integrity. Friends who stayed close during advantage and disappeared during struggle. Relationships built on utility, affection measured by usefulness. He had once mistaken all of that for success. Now it looked flimsy. Worse than flimsy, expensive and empty. Meanwhile, news about Zuri kept surfacing. Not gossip, impact. A maternal health initiative in northern Ghana, a scholarship expansion in rural Kenya, a trade logistics corridor creating jobs between Nigeria and Benin, affordable housing partnerships in urban communities where women were rebuilding after violence. She rarely centered herself in any of it. That consistency made people trust her. And trust, Tunde was learning too late, is more valuable than admiration. 2 years after the Kigali summit, Zuri attended the opening of a community learning and innovation center outside Accra. There were no red carpets, no luxury sponsors demanding stage time, no photographers screaming her name. Children ran across the courtyard with books in their hands. Teachers talked to parents about enrollment. Volunteers arranged chairs beneath a shaded canopy. It was a modest event, which is why it mattered. After the ceremony, a young woman approached her nervously. She could not have been older than 20. "Chairwoman Okonkwo," she said, voice trembling. "May I thank you?" Zuri smiled gently. "Of course." The young woman took a breath. "My mother left a violent marriage 3 years ago. One of your housing programs helped us move. Last year, I received a scholarship through your foundation," and her eyes filled with tears. "Next month, I begin medical school." For a moment, Zuri said nothing. Then she reached forward and held the girl's hands. "That future belongs to you," she said softly. "Walk into it fully." The girl shook her head. "No, ma'am. Women like you made it possible for girls like me to imagine it first." The conversation lasted less than a minute. But later that evening, as Zuri sat alone on her terrace overlooking the Atlantic, that moment stayed with her more than any summit, board victory, or media profile ever had. Because wealth can buy reach, it cannot buy meaning. Meaning is earned in human consequence. And that, more than revenge, was what her life had become. People loved telling her story as if it were about a cheating husband who lost everything. It wasn't. He had lost something precious, yes, but her life was not a sermon written to educate his regret. It was larger than that. The real turning point had not been the gala, not the divorce papers, not even the inheritance. It had been the moment she stopped measuring her worth by the willingness of one man to recognize it. That was the true beginning. Everything else came after. The businesses, the influence, the headlines, the speeches, the respect. All of it arrived only after she understood that dignity cannot survive where it is constantly negotiated. Some people enter your life to build with you. Others enter your life to reveal where you have abandoned yourself. Tunde had done the second, and once she learned the lesson, she no longer needed the classroom. One evening, as the sun sank into the Atlantic and the sky turned copper, Zuri stood barefoot on the terrace outside her home. The wind moved softly. Far below, waves kept their own counsel. Her phone buzzed with another update from her team. A new women-led agritech fund had exceeded its first-year targets. Thousands more livelihoods would be supported. She smiled and set the phone aside. Somewhere in another city, perhaps another country, people still discussed the old scandal, the gala, the mistress, the divorce papers, the comeback. But those details no longer defined the story. The heart of the story was simpler. A woman had been humiliated by people who confused gentleness with weakness.
She had been discarded by a man who benefited from her loyalty without understanding its worth. Then life stripped away the illusion, not by destroying him overnight, not by making her bitter, but by giving her the freedom to become fully herself. And once she did, everything changed. She was no longer the wife seated at the back table.